Interning. Obviously, it's great to do, and I did so 3 times during my undergrad and once during my master's degree. And each opportunity was great because they were all different experiences. So let's walk through them. And as we do, I'll make note of what you can do to maximize your experience. We'll cover 3 different kinds of internships. The first will be at a production company. I interned at Curtis Productions in the summer of 2002 as I was entering my freshman year of college. Then I interned at ABC7 in Chicago in the summer of 2004, where we'll then go deeper into talking about how you intern in larger TV markets. Then 2 years later, I interned at CBS2 in their Investigative unit during the summer of 2006 after I had just graduated college. And finally, as you know, I interned at ABC News Channel 20 in Springfield during my master's program and was eventually hired there. And when we talk about that, we'll talk about interning at a medium to small market station. But for now, let's go way back and talk about my internship with Curtis Productions during the summer of 2002. If you're familiar with the TV series Cold Case Files, then you know Bill Curtis. He was an anchor reporter in Chicago for a very long time and is a legend there. You actually probably do know him, and here's how. You'll probably recognize his voice if I were to play it for you, because he is the narrator in the movie Anchorman. Yes, that's really him. In fact, that's why they specifically wanted him, because Bill is so respected in the world of journalism and in his second career as a documentary filmmaker. Typically, you can't intern this early in your academic career because college campuses don't usually allow you to get credit for an internship so early on, and the company that you want to intern for won't let you intern unless you're getting credit or you're being compensated by payment. You have to be compensated by one or the two. This was an unpaid internship, and in fact, that was very common at the time and would still be common for about the next decade. In fact, it wasn't until I got to NBC5 in 2010, where the year later, in 2011, I was starting to hear word from HR that we had some paid internships for people in journalism school. Nowadays, it's a lot more common to be able to find a paid internship. But back then, I was lucky and had a connection to Curtis Productions, and so I didn't have to worry about getting credit for this unpaid internship. I could just intern, and the people at Curtis Productions are not only smart, but also very kind. They didn't call me an intern. Instead, they called me a researcher, because my job would actually be that, to help research the future episodes of Cold Case Files, a nonfiction true crime series that aired on A&E. Also too, when I called sources saying that I was a researcher, they would take me seriously, as opposed to if I identified myself as an intern. And part of my job, and more than likely a lot of what yours will probably be as well, was reading the countless emails that came in and start to research the ones that had promise, the ones that had substance. So, to research, they taught me the basics of how to do this, and here's something that was invaluable. They taught me how to use what's called Lexisnexis. It's probably best known for being a tool that lawyers use to research, but all sorts of professionals use it as well, including some newsrooms. The people working the assignment desk might use it to look up very old newspaper articles, amongst other information. Investigative reporters use it as well if their newsroom already subscribes to it. And it's an expensive service because there's a lot of information in there. Sometimes a lot more than what a Google search is going to be able to reveal. And many colleges typically subscribe to some level of it. The people who run your campus library probably know, and that's because the academic researchers use the service for all of the same reasons everyone else does. So, during my undergrad, that meant that I could use Lexisnexis for free using only my student ID. Also keep in mind too that Google wasn't nearly as powerful as it is today. In fact, Google has grown up very much since then. And to further date this pro tip for you, YouTube hadn't been invented yet. That wouldn't happen until 2005. And even then, Google itself wouldn't buy it until 2006. This is all a very long way of saying that if you knew how to use Lexisnexis back then, you had a very valuable skill. Now, let's talk about approach. The way I approached that internship is that I did everything they asked me to, which of course I know is exactly what you're going to do. And naturally, after a week or two went by and I had mastered the task that they asked me to, I'd ask if I could do more. And usually the answer was getting more of the same work. But that was actually fun because the work was usually looking something up or researching a future topic. And naturally, all the topics were different, so there was variety. One topic was about a person called the Green River Killer out of Washington State. It's an interesting Google if you have some time. I got to know a lot of people there, including other producers who I also helped do some research. I also spent a lot of time with the video editors. I used to hang out with them sometimes at the end of the day as they were editing their respective show. And that was interesting because I was only used to editing together short news pieces, not 45-minute mystery shows. It was fascinating watching them work, and equally so, sitting in the meetings where we would screen these episodes and staff would give feedback. It was a great education in what to look for in a finished piece. And some of those things were, does the final piece actually answer all of the questions that it promised at the beginning? Does the final piece naturally make the audience think of questions while they're watching? Because if it does, did we answer those? And if we didn't, well, we need to. Also too, just seeing how many people are involved in a single episode was an education in itself. There are in-house producers who also field produce, meaning they're going into the field with Bill. That crew is then rounded out by videographers, separate sound people, and of course, many others. Far more people than you'll ever see produce a news piece. And again, these were all distinctions that I made note of. I also learned about ratings as well. And that involved what rating Cold Case Files got versus the other shows on cable in that time slot. At one point that summer, it involved the debut of a competing show called Power, Privilege, and Justice with writer and investigative journalist Dominic Dunn. It seemed to do well, but I don't really remember it being a significant competitor to Bill Kurtis's Cold Case Files, because Cold Case Files had been on the air for a while and therefore was already well established. But that competing show did well in its time slot. It went on for 9 seasons until Dunn passed away in 2009. In short, this internship was about learning and listening everything I could, because compared to them, I knew nothing. So now let's fast forward to ABC7 Chicago in the summer of 2004. By the time I interned at ABC7 in Chicago 2 summers later, I had a great foundation in TV news. This made it so that I could truly appreciate the experience of interning in the 3rd largest media market in the country. I shadowed Dayside anchor reporter Kevin Roy 3 days a week. And it was 3 days a week because he anchored on the weekends and therefore there would be nothing for me to do. And he too was very kind, meaning he's a professional and by no means a babysitter. And this meant the world to me because many days he was open to me being in the field with him and his videographer. And this too was a lot of me listening and learning as well as doing what was asked of me on the rare occasions that something actually was. And that's a distinction here. Interning in a large market is far different than interning in a small market because you rarely get to do work that makes air. But I was lucky because Kevin was again that weekend anchor, and because of that, he let me write the short scripts for the weekend franchise, I Love My Pet. And the maximum script length on that was 30 seconds, and I'm sure he tweaked them. But again, it was something. Outside of that, the internship couldn't be any more hands-on because major market stations like ABC7 Chicago are sometimes unionized, which means the intern can't touch equipment. But I was cool with that because I asked a lot of questions based on what I was seeing and what was making news. And everyone I asked enjoyed answering because what I was asking was based off of the content that they were creating. I was showing a deep interest in what they were doing and they appreciated that. They explained things to me and also taught me things when I interpreted something wrong or didn't understand a part of the process. They always taught me a better way. So having access to so many people who've been doing this far longer than I've been alive, and you've climbed the ladder of TV news from small market to medium to large, was incredible. And that was the true value of this internship. And of course, my ability to honor that was because I was so lucky to go to a school where I could touch the equipment and help produce a live newscast that aired on PBS. And that's what made it so that I didn't care if I couldn't touch equipment at ABC7. In fact, just being able to observe, think about the process, and ask questions without being responsible of actually writing the news and getting it to air was a dream. So now, this brings us to the CBS2 Investigative Unit, the last internship I had during my undergrad, and this one, again, was at CBS2 in Chicago. So, here too, I was called a researcher, much like I was for Curtis Productions. I answered phones for the unit, checked email, and also too, checked a lot of snail mail. People still sent us regular mail telling us about a problem they were having. And I was very fortunate to be interning for Pam Zeckman, who is not only a Chicago legend when it comes to investigative reporting, is very much known in the industry as a whole as one of the gold standards. And this is the internship where I learned how to use spreadsheets to do data-based investigations. And one of the stories we worked on was investigating if the Chicago Police Department had once again altered crime stats to artificially bring down the murder rate. Chicago PD first started doing this in the 70s and 80s. The easiest way for the cops to do this is to downgrade the conclusion of a murder-homicide investigation to one of two things: non-criminal death, meaning in their mind it wasn't murder, or just labeling it as a death investigation, meaning there was no conclusion yet. And that leads you to what you may know of as cold cases, because that too is a very common label. But to get them off the books for homicide, again, they labeled them as death investigation because giving something a label over here means it doesn't have this label over here. And here's a quick definition of cold case. All that means is that there are no more leads, there's no more information to follow up on, and therefore the metaphor of the trail has gone cold is how we get that name. It was the foundation for Bill Curtis's cold case files because, after all, the show was actually about those cases. And here now, talking about Chicago cops killing crime, so to speak, I actually ran into the term again, which is a whole wild other story. Back to the internship here. Obviously, the problem with Chicago cops killing crime in this way is that the actual murders were actual murders. And Pam figured this out by comparing the police investigations and their supposed conclusions with the autopsy reports from the medical examiner. She found plenty of cases where the medical examiner, otherwise known as the ME, was quite sure that the person had been murdered based on the marks on their body. The ocean of difference between the confident conclusions of the medical examiner and the very convenient conclusions of the Chicago Police Department was the natural conflict in this story. Pam originally broke this story in the early 80s and won one of the most prestigious awards that you can, a Peabody. Good storytelling, good journalism, and even breakthrough work in film, documentaries, and even comedy can all win. You win because your work has a lasting impact on society. Back to the internship. So, because the police department had done this before, Pam was just simply curious if they were doing it again. She wasn't tipped off, just curious. So my job was to help her and her producer match together hundreds of cases side by side, then compare what the police said to what the medical examiner said. And once we did that, we could then flag suspicious cases. That's as far as we got by the end of August when my internship with them ended, and then I went to go do my master's program. What's interesting is that Pam would go on to find dozens or more cases where their classification was falsified to bring the murder rate down. This story was published in November of that year. And please know, it just wasn't murder that police were artificially bringing down. Back in the 70s and 80s, it was also intentionally misclassifying robberies, rapes, and other crime, especially violent crime, because it was all to bring down the crime stats to raise the tourism rate and attract large conferences, especially business conferences, to Chicago. It was an incredible process to learn, and one definitely worth passing along to you. So, in review, if you're interning in a large market and can't touch equipment, be a sponge for everything else. Ask questions based on the content being produced, and if you want to observe something, just ask. Usually they'll let you. I watched many newscasts from the back of the control room, which made me better at producing because I understood everybody's job. So now let's talk about small markets. If you intern in a small market, you can probably touch equipment and create stories. Now, they may not let you actually be on the air, but you can probably shoot stories and edit them. They may even let you write packages and have an other anchor voice them. And I know that might seem a little unfair if that's what happens, but do it anyway because it's still experience. Revoice them yourself and get critiqued by the anchors, the reporters, and especially the news director. Because remember, it's the news director anywhere who's going to hire you. Now, if the market is small enough, or they're short-staffed enough, you might get lucky. They might actually let you be on the air. I just don't want you to expect to set the expectation that you actually will be on the air. But again, if you're doing good work, have built a good reputation, they might let you. Ask to have a package or two with your voice in the stand-up, or perhaps bookends, make the air. If all you do is take the skills you're learning in this course, you should end up impressing the news director. If you're shooting super wide, medium tight, super tight, active interviews, and shooting sequence stand-ups, you'll blow their mind because no one shows that much energy, drive, and skill interning at that level. These are some of the things I did when interning at ABC News Channel 20 during my master's program. I wasn't allowed to go live on the air, but I could record bookends in the studio to put around my packages. Hard work really does pay off. And again, really quick, if you're looking for an internship, just Google the station's call letters plus careers, and they should be mixed in with the real-world jobs at the station. And that's partially because, again, some of these are going to be paid. If for some reason you're not finding anything, just replace careers with intern or internships, and something should pop up. And as always, if you have any questions while you're on your adventure of doing all of this, please feel free to reach out. And I'll see you in the next video.